Welcome to our communication workout. And Zach, I'm going to be handing over to Zach very shortly, who's going to lead us through this highly interactive webinar focused on the innovator's profile. But before I do that, I'll just quickly introduce the Innovation Beehive. Zach, if you can forward on.
Yep.
So yeah, there's Zach. That's Zach saying yep, and I'll hand over to him to say a little bit more about himself in a second. But I'm Joe Nagel from the Innovation Beehive. We exist to accelerate the potential of people, of teams, and of organizations. And today, you're joining us to accelerate your potential at communication, at teamwork, and at optimizing your teams to really deliver both in lockdown as we return and beyond that in your day-to-day operations as you go forward. So the Innovation Beehive, we work with a wide range of clients. Zach, you can flip forward.
Yep, sorry, Joe. I'm also having Zoom problems this morning.
There we go. So some of our clients, you can see on the screen here, we've got that we've recently been working with the Growth Hub. And if anyone's from a small business, highly recommend you look online, just Google Growth Hub and your local area and see if there is any support out there for you, because they provide a whole lot of provision for small and medium-sized enterprises, and they're doing a lot through these challenging times. We work with Askham Bryan College, and one of my colleagues from Askham Bryan is on the call today. Hi, Richard. We work with some big clients, including Menzies Aviation, global business. We're doing a leadership program for them. We work with Google. I'm quite excited to work with Google, being an innovation company at our heart. It's great to work with one of the big innovation companies out there. But we also take the sort of knowledge of innovation that we've garnered over the years, working on direct innovation projects, and apply them to people-orientated challenges for organizations like McDonald's, Egan Zehnder, and then deliver training for companies like Money Supermarket and Abcam and the World Economic Forum and BP. So a really wide range of clients, and we're excited to sort of bring innovative thinking, creativity, and to accelerate the potential of organizations right across sectors. So welcome to everyone. I can see we've got a real range of sectors on the call with us today. We've got manufacturing, we've got finance, education, and more. So Zach, I am going to now hand over to you to really crack on with the webinar. So over to you. And we can't see you, Zach. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that.
No, I've been clicking on start video. Obviously, it worked earlier on this morning. And I keep clicking on it and nothing happens.
Well, that's a terrible shame. Hopefully, you can all imagine Zach. Zach, dare I describe you, or should we just...
No, I'll do it for you, Joe. I'll do it for you. So imagine a person in there getting into middle age, balding, a little bit heavier than he would like, and there's a reason why I'm explaining things in this way, as you'll learn as we go through this particular session. So I know what most of you are thinking. You're thinking, what are we doing today? At least that's what Joe and I think about every time we wake up in the morning, obviously in separate houses. So what we'll be covering today is, number one, we'll give you an overview of a tool. Now, some of you watching this webinar have had experience of this tool before, have used the tool. Some of you have even loved the tool and embedded it into your own way of working. The tool is the Innovator's Profile. We'll then be looking at something called a Recognize, and Joe and I will be doing an exercise, and we'll encourage you to engage with that as well. And that's about seeing the way that other people like to approach the world. We'll also be doing an exercise, Joe and I, on communications. How can we make sure that using this thing, the Innovator's Profile, written communication is as strong as possible, so that we can make sure that as we ease back into the next normal, that our communications with our teams, our suppliers, our customers are as powerful as possible. We'll also then be looking at adapting ourselves, with Joe and I doing an exercise. And again, we encourage you to interact with that. And then there'll be a bit of a summary and some key takeaways. Joe has put, if you haven't completed the Innovator's Profile, a link in the chat there, which I strongly recommend you have up in front of you at all times. Gosh, it's quite frustrating not being able to see my own face.
I'm sad too.
I'll just have to try and engage people now with my voice and the chat box as well. So you're probably thinking, well, what will I take away from this webinar? I'm attending so many webinars all the time. It's highly frustrating. Well, in this webinar, you'll get a process to help strengthen your communication. You'll get practical tools to help you work better with others. And you'll get a foundation actually to build a stronger team. And that could be people you work with immediately that perhaps report to you, but it could also be a wider team such as a supply chain or just general suppliers or customers or your own family. I've used this tool with my own family, and it's really helped to have a much stronger approach between us so that everything becomes more cohesive. We'll also get some practice using the tools. Now, what's different between this and some of the innovators profile work that some of you may have seen in the past is that we'll be actually doing practical exercises which you can add to and support us on as well, so you can begin to see how it works in real life. However, I have some terrible news. We need something from you as well, lovely people. We need you to bring something with you today, and that is an open mind, which we'll explain more about later on. A willingness to accept and practice the theories and tools we're going to be talking about today, but also the ability to immerse yourself in the content. I appreciate that you may have other pressing matters right now, but we'd love it if you could give us some attention and some information in the chat box as we go through the webinar today, so that your learning will be stronger on the way out. Also, you might need a piece of paper and a pen. But most of all, of course, we want your interaction. We appreciate that this is a webinar, but we'd love you to put in any comments on the chat that you see fit. There'll also be a poll as well. In more detail, what we'll be covering today is the 3 principles of communication using the innovators profile, and that is diverge, converge, and align. And we'll go through each one of those in a bit of detail with some practical exercises. Now, so if we start off with diverge, the principle of diverge in the innovators profile is that of understanding that we are all different from each other. Of course, we know that we're different from each other. We've been taught that from a very young age. We've been taught that whether it's by nature or by nurture, we are all like a fingerprint. We are all approaching the world in a different way from each other, and that's due to a number of different reasons. One of which, of course, is the brain, which we'll come on to in a moment. But it's important that we are different from each other, because that allows us to leverage different ways of approaching a topic or a subject or a way of thinking. And it also allows us to make sure that we can get the best out of any problem we're facing, out of any communication within a working environment and so on, by taking into account the fact that everyone does think slightly differently. A good example of this is, think back to the last time that you were at odds with someone that you were working with in a team, or it could perhaps be even a family member or a friend. You had one way of looking at solving a challenge, or coming up with a great idea, or thinking about a particular piece of stimulus, or something on the news, for example. And your thoughts about that particular topic were one thing. But unfortunately, the people around you felt differently. They felt that, let's call it an idea now. So they felt that the idea that you were working on was meant to go in one direction. You felt it was meant to go in another direction, and there ended up being conflict, or at least a difference in expectation of the output of that particular idea. Now that's a challenge, because if we want problem solving or ideation or thinking about a particular topic or working cohesively as a team to be as strong as possible, then we need to make sure that that idea or that problem or that teamwork doesn't blow away in the wind because of those differences of opinion, differences in way of thinking, and different approach. So we need to absolutely be certain that when you do think of someone who thinks differently from you, we're able to step back and appreciate what it is they say before that entire idea collapses around us. There's a number of reasons why, as I mentioned before, that we do think differently. Probably the biggest one from our perspective is the brain. Now, thankfully, Joe and I both do have a brain, and although Joe may beg to differ for me sometimes, but we do know that our brains are, firstly, they're unique, meaning that my brain is different to Joe's brain. We know that our brains are specialized, meaning that the brain has different functionality. A different part of the brain conducts a different process. We also know that the brain is situational, meaning it will react differently depending on the external stimulus it receives through the receptors in the skin, the eyes, and so on. We also know that those specialized parts are also interconnected, meaning they can communicate with each other. We also know that brain has dominance. So in some people, a particular specialized part of the brain is more dominant than in another person. And that might be through nature or nurture. There are research articles which vote for both or either. We also know that the brain is malleable, meaning old dogs can learn new tricks. The brain can continue to grow regardless of age. And most importantly, the brain is whole. All of these parts act together to make up essentially three things: the source of who we are, what we do, and how we do it. Now, the brain is fascinating. I've been studying the brain for a number of years. I did psychology at degree level, and then spent a long time working in either running my own businesses or working in sales, where I made it my obsession to look at the art of persuasion. Now, positive persuasion, not manipulation. Persuasion in terms of how can we use our brains to make sure that we get the best out of a team or get the best out of a customer or really understand what someone is trying to say to us. Now, my research into it was predated. Well, it's been predated for many, many years, but I first got interested in the predating around the late 60s when General Electric started to conduct some studies into the brain and how it works. And they did this because they wanted their teams to work better together, to see things from the same perspective, and to understand the way that we operate as people. That was then compounded by some studies that you will probably know about by Roger Sperry and Paul MacLean. Now, don't worry, no need to type in the chat. I know what you're all thinking. You're all thinking, yes, Roger Sperry, that was on the tip of my tongue. He did the left brain, right brain theory, right? Yes, he did. So Paul MacLean did the triune brain model, and Roger Sperry, left brain, right brain. And Sperry, in his research, I think it was 1973, determined that we all have a left-hand side of the brain and a right-hand side of the brain. The left side of the brain controls the right-hand side of the body and deals with facts, numbers, details, logic, process, planning, safety, and things in that ilk. On the right-hand side of the brain, which controls the left-hand side of the body, it deals with creativity, artistry, seeing the big picture, intuition linked to ideas, emotions, musicality, spirituality, and empathy linked to emotion. And his thesis was that we all have a preference. Paul MacLean, on the other hand, with his triune brain model, said that, yes, there was probably a left and a right, but there's also cerebral, limbic, and reptilian. The cerebral is that big bumpy bit you see on the top of the revolving head here, which you also see on CSI when they do an autopsy. That deals with higher level thinking, more intellectual thinking. The limbic part, which I will highlight as it comes around now, there, deals with more instinctual thinking, and the reptilian at the top of the spine deals with pure basic instincts such as sex and eating and survival. Now, a number of different commentators have actually combined those models together along with other studies in order to create different psychometric profiles. We've done the same with a slightly different angle. So we have here a model which we've developed. We developed it actually in 2017. We tested it during 2018, and we went to launch in 2019. And it's been accepted broadly in a number of, quite a big number of different organizations. Some have even taken it to heart in their culture. So they have it as part of their onboarding process. They have posters up all over the walls, and they've really started to use this to embed the culture in their company. It's quite a It's a London bank. So we believe in the tool, and I strongly recommend that you keep an open mind to the tool, because to put the theory into a structure or a metaphor in this graphic here, you can see there are 4 colored quadrants. The 2 on the left here, called questioning and classifying, represent the left-hand side of the brain. The 2 on the right here, experimenting and interacting, they represent the right-hand side of the brain. We also have 2 at the top here, questioning, experimenting, representing cerebral, and we have 2 on the bottom here representing limbic. That's classifying and interacting. Now, if you haven't already read your report and committed it to memory and kept it under your pillow as a momentum of excited glee in understanding your profile, do feel free, as Joe has mentioned in the chat, to download it. You get a 9-page report, which we'll come on to in a minute, which talks about your preferences. So the thesis is that you have a preference in 1 or more of these quadrants. So you could be single dominant in questioning, double dominant, you could be triple dominant, quadruple dominant, and each of them come with their own challenges and strengths. It's important to note that just because you may be single dominant in experimenting, for example, it doesn't mean you cannot leverage the other parts of the brain. It doesn't mean that if I were single dominant in questioning, that I'm unable then to connect with people, I'm unable then to come up with great ideas. It just means that in my natural state, I'm more likely to think about, and we'll learn this in a second, numbers, facts, and logic, for example. Now, to give you a bit more meat on what those quadrants mean, some of the detail behind are that the questioning quadrant means that you might have a preference, if that's your dominant quadrant, in analyzing things, dealing with numbers, thinking about facts, problem solving, setting goals, that working to targets, fixing things, being practical, theorizing and measuring. If you have a dominance in classifying, you might have a strength in administration, looking at detail, having things under control and consistent, planning, working to deadlines, safety, working to a structure, scheduling things, working to a process and being, I mentioned consistency already, and supporting others. If you have a strength in interacting, it might be that you're better at communicating, you are great at working on relationships or resolving customer issues, or teaching, or training, or listening to others, or general teamwork, persuading others, or intuition and empathy linked to emotion. If you have a strength in experimenting, it might be that you're very good at seeing the big picture, creating things, selling ideas, taking risks, visualizing, being playful, breaking rules, understanding strategy, but not setting goals linked to that strategy, understanding concepts and working with your imagination. Now, again, you could be single dominant or more, and all of that is fine. There are many psychometrics out there, and what makes the innovator's profile different in our eyes is that it draws on both the psychology and physiology of the brain, which informs these approaches, and then we've also then researched it on the lived experience of innovators across many industries. Joe mentioned earlier that we do a lot of work in innovation with companies around the world, and over the last 11 years, we've been leveraging the knowledge of these innovators to help us come out with this profile as well. So that means by completing the innovator's profile, you'll be better able to apply the mindset, behaviors, and thinking of innovators to leverage every aspect of your life. Because the profile gives you an understanding of your innovation thinking preferences in line with other psychometrics, and it enables you to apply that understanding to communication, creativity, and collaboration. The goal is not to put you in a box, but actually to allow you to flex your thinking and your communication with agility to those areas in which you're not dominant. So if Joe, who you can see gazing into the screen there, was strong in classifying, for example, then his challenge is how can he communicate effectively with someone who is strong in interacting if that's not his strength? Good. Do let me know in the chat if I get carried away with myself and speak too quickly or anything like that. It's probably time that we got some interaction from you guys. Have a quick look at this screen here. In a second, we're going to put a poll up. And actually, Joe, can we do it on this screen?
Yeah, I've got it here. You ready for me to launch it?
Yeah, so Joe's going to put a poll up and just think what your most dominant quadrant might be. Are we able to move it to the left there, Joe, at all? Do you know? Maybe I can do that.
Yeah, you can move it on your own screen. So just
Okay.
move it around to where it's most useful for you so that you can still see the screen.
Lovely. So, yeah, so just put in what you think your most dominant quadrant is. Again, there's no good or bad answer. It's just about where you think it might be. And again, who knows, you might be double dominant or triple dominant or quad dominant, but for now, which one do you think is the strongest in you? Joe, let's not reveal ours yet because we'll do, based on the interaction that people have had with us so far, later in this, we'll get them to guess for themselves.
Sure thing, Zach. Everyone's completed it. So you ready for me to share the results?
Yeah, great. Good, so we've got a variety here. We've got 43% questioning, 14% classifying, 14% experimenting, and 29% interacting. We did one the other day where it was actually equal on all. Not that that really means anything, but what we should do with this is I should be very, very logical in the way that I run through the rest of this webinar, whilst also being personable to engage the top two tranches there.
No, knowing Zach well, I can say good luck with that, mate.
I will try. I will try. I will try. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, everyone. That's great. Let me just get rid of that, and then we will have a look at this. So, part of I mentioned earlier that the innovator's profile, it's a bit like an elastic band. It's not about saying, right, my dominant quadrant is questioning. It's actually about saying, how can I leverage the other quadrants to make sure that my interaction with everybody is as strong as possible, but also the way that I work is as strong as possible because I'm not missing anything from the other quadrants of the brain. So what we might do is, Joe, how about this?
Yeah.
How about you give me a topic to talk about. I will talk naturally from my dominant quadrant, and I'll try and do it just from my dominant quadrant. Of course, lovely listeners, you will have bleed into other quadrants as well, because we are made up of parts, different amounts in every quadrant. But I'll try and talk from my most dominant and see if we can guess in the chat if people want to just type in which they think is my dominant quadrant. Joe, what topic shall I talk about?
I think this will be quite entertaining for us all. I'd like you to talk about how you would go about choosing a life partner.
From my most dominant quadrant.
From your most dominant quadrant.
Okay, and just to be clear, we have, this is off the cuff, lovely people, to see what the profile looks like working real life. I've just taken a sip of espresso and spilt it on my desk to prepare me for what we're about to do. Okay, choosing a life partner. Well, you know, Joe.
By the way, if anybody wants to take notes, I know Zach described himself earlier, but I don't think he did himself justice. Imagine Brad Pitt.
Yeah, and keep imagining. That's what.
Keep on imagining. Yeah. Keep on imagining.
Yeah, eyes closed. All right, so okay, so life partner. Oh God. Well, you know, the first thing is, you know, as I look at, you know, just like the purpose of you know, choosing a life partner, I have to think, oh my God. Well, the first thing is, you know, I've tried those online dating things. I like the idea of online dating. I thought it was really quite fun, and was a great way to get to meet people. But you know, there must be a better way of doing it. You know, how about, you know, we come up with this idea where we just stop doing that thing. I know we could come up with an app for online dating, which is not where you swipe left or swipe right. Instead, you just you get to choose somebody based on only their hobbies, or you get to choose somebody based only on, do feel free to type into the chat if you think you know which single quadrant I might be talking from, or we get to choose them just from, you know, the adventures they like to have and the fun they like to have. Oh, that would be great. I feel that you know, the life partner I end up with, you know, she's got to be adventurous. She's got to have, I mean, she's got to be able to have a bit of banter for a start. She's got to be able to just, you know, have fun. God, I've been sat in the house for so long, Joe. I think it would be great if I could just go out and have fun with somebody. Okay, that's probably enough.
I think we've got some responses coming through.
Yeah. So I mean, there's all except a tiny handful have said that it's experimenting. Joe, could you reveal my dominant quadrant?
I am pretty confident your dominant quadrant is experimenting, Zach.
Oh, great. Thank you for recognizing
Well done,
that,
everyone.
everybody. We'll talk about recognizing that shortly. But Joe, you don't get off that easy. As the head of this call, I think we should do it to you too. This is the benefit of not planning this bit. So Joe, actually, I can't remember what your dominant quadrant is, Joe, but obviously I could guess based on my knowledge of the profile. I think a topic for you, Joe, would be winning the lottery in your dominant quadrant.
Okay. Here we go.
And team, do you guess Joe's as well?
So I've actually got I've got a plan for winning the lottery that's based on some research that I did. I did an analysis of the last 13 years of lottery results, and I identified that there are certain numbers that are more likely to come up. So I know that I'm going to use the number 13, and there's two reasons for that. One is because when I did my analysis, I identified that actually 13 doesn't come up so often, but when it does come up, fewer people have chosen it. So actually that's better. I did this sort of macro measurement and analysis of the key choices that people make when it comes to picking numbers. And I realized that they do pick 13. They don't pick 13, but they do pick 7. But I thought, well, actually, if I want to win the lottery, that's 6 numbers, then if I pick 13 and 7, 7 is the lucky number.
Oh, Joe, that'll do. It's making my brain hurt just listening to you.
You don't want to know my secret? You sure?
Okay, so we've got an avalanche of questioning, Joe. What quadrant were you talking from?
I was indeed talking from questioning. Thank you.
Okay. Now, just so you all know, if you feel up to it, later in this webinar, there will be an opportunity for you to practice this verbally, should you wish to. We'll just see how it goes. But for now, we'll just crack onto this quickly. On the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a QR code. If you want to get your phone out and then show the camera to the QR code, you'll be taken through to the profile, or you can type in profile.innovationbeehive.co.uk to get the profile for free. Woohoo! Joe's also put it in the chat. And just to give you an idea of what that is all about, firstly, it's a 9-page report. You get the cover, no extra charge. You get an introduction to the profile itself. You get an overview of design thinking. This was originally developed by us in order to help you and your team come up with better ideas, because you think better and communicate better together. But you get an overview of that as well, and then an understanding of the 4 quadrants, your profile itself. Oh, look, there's mine. Then you get the information linked to the most dominant quadrants that you have, and then some tips on what you can do to flex your profile into other areas. I should probably point out that it's very, very rare that you would ever start off being strong in one, questioning, for example, and then naturally flip to have a dominance in classifying, the diagonally opposite one. We'll talk about this in a minute. But it's very, very rare unless there's been some sort of major emotional trauma or some sort of damage to the cells of the brain. Otherwise, generally, your profile will remain the same throughout your life, which is why so many of the psychometrics you come across do have similar aspects, because they're all based on one of two things. One is the physiology of the brain, like ours, and the other is Jungian. Good. So that was Diverge. Diverge is all about making sure we can understand that we are different and what that looks like. Converge is all about making sure that we can recognize other people's strengths before we move into a line where we begin to work better together. So Converge is about recognizing other people's strengths. Now, when we think about strengths, take a moment right now to think about people in your life or people that you work with who have a natural strength that might be different to you. All you need to do right now is just think about that. So if someone is perhaps has a dominance or preference in the questioning quadrant, they'll be good at working with numbers, analyzing reports, analyzing financial stuff, thinking logically, working on technical issues, theorizing, accurately measuring output or goal setting. If someone is more dominant in classifying, they will put those numbers into a structure. So they'll be good at organizing data. They'll find overlooked detail. They might read terms and conditions and the small print. They'll work consistently from day to day and from week to week. They'll be good at providing supervision very often to people and building detailed plans, developing procedures and describing plans and processes. In terms of interacting, they'll usually show a dominance in coaching others or sharing things with others, wanting involvement, being intuitive with other people's feelings, working as a team, persuading stakeholders, spotting non-verbal cues like voice tone and body language and so on, building enthusiasm and anticipating how others will respond. With experimenting, they will be very comfortable challenging the status quo, seeing new possibilities or repurposing things, solving challenges in creative ways, handling multiple ideas at the same time, solving problems intuitively, sensing upcoming challenges, working with a lack of detailed input, and exploring parallel worlds. Now, I need to be totally clear that just because I am dominant here, I'm nearly double dominant, but I'm definitely dominant in experimenting. That doesn't mean I'm strong at all of those things and other things besides that. It might be that I'm super strong at handling multiple ideas at the same time and solving problems intuitively. It might be that I'm super strong in sensing upcoming challenges, but useless at challenging the status quo. That doesn't change the fact that that's a strength for mine. So think about, don't do anything with it yet, but start to think about it. Who you know, who thinks differently from you, and what is it you see in them? Because Joe and I think we'll do some sort of exercise around recognizing somebody. And Joe, I think we might do it for someone that you and I both know.
Yes, indeed. I think that's a very good idea.
Okay, so just everyone take a look at the screen now. Think about this whilst we're doing this exercise, and we might ask for your input or give your input whilst we're doing it to the chat box for someone you know and what you see in them that is different to you. Okay, so on the next page, we'll give you some cues to look through and start to write in the chat while we're doing it what it is you see. So we use, it's such a shame you can't see me because I've got this document in paper. Let me try again, starting video. I've got this document, nothing. I've got this document, Signals, in front of me, in my hand, in paper, and I'm going to physically write on it. You can hear it rattling. There we go. I'm going to physically write on it as Joe and I are talking. So Joe, this person that we're going to think about, his name begins with R, right?
His name begins with R, yes.
We'll just call him Richard. Okay. All right, so Joe, as I think about this person, I'm going to write down some stuff in the boxes which I think are the strongest ones. I'm not going to write down necessarily in every box. We need to pick out what we think, what are the traits that he shows or the speech he uses, which bring up something strong. So as we think about this person, Joe, you know him better than me, but my experience of him, that he's definitely quite direct.
Oh yes, definitely direct. Yeah, straight to the point.
To the point. He's quite efficient with information.
Yeah, loves data. Loves having all the data at his fingertips, so that he can really create a strong argument and create a logical argument.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. I haven't worked with him enough to know whether or not he backs up his speech with numbers at all.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. In fact, I'd say that the decision-making process is focused on numbers, and they come out in the conversation around the decision as well.
Okay. What about, well, is there another quadrant there that leaps out to you for Richard?
Well, there's also a lot of detail orientation and a big focus on process, very structured, and likes to understand and also share the detail, which is, it kind of complements the logic side, I guess.
Logical. Okay. Now, we are all made up of all four quadrants to great.
Oh, exactly. There's one other thing, actually. So Richard always talks in threes. So you'd say, oh, how was your day? And the response would be, right, three things. 1, 2, 3. And often, interestingly, he won't have thought of the third one until he gets to it, but he'll always have a third one.
Interesting. Okay, that's actually both classifying and questioning.
Mm.
because he's constrained by the 3 and there's a process to it. Interesting. All right, very good. I know that he can come up with ideas. I know that he can interact with people on a one-to-one basis. I don't feel they're his, for interacting experiment, I don't feel they're his strongest quadrants though.
No, I know he can lean into it when he needs to though.
Okay. So basically we've got probably double dominant in questioning and classifying, right?
Shall we bring Richard on? Because this is a little bit like, what's that show? Blind
Yeah,
Date,
cool.
sort of. And he's actually on. So I think I'm going to try and allow you to talk, Richard, and maybe you can tell us what your dominant quadrant is. You there? You might need to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hello, there you are. Welcome to the webinar.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Questioning and classifying are my double dominants, and we've got experimenting slightly lower and interacting, which is lower. Now, what the innovator's profile has really done for me in terms of that is it's proven that I have got the ability to flex. Of course, I'm a learning and development professional, so I would be worried if it's the case I wasn't able to experiment with new things or interact with different people. But it's I certainly lead with that questioning and classifying at the forefront of my approach. And there's absolutely the ability to I think Zach uses the phrase stretch the elastic band and flex the elastic band. And whilst it's maybe my non-preferred approach, I can still use it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. And I had to rush us through that last bit there because I know, Richard, you have to head off. So thank you so much for sticking around long enough to share your perspective on the profile and also to share your dominant strengths with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll let you get on with whatever you do now.
So, Joe, thank you for that discussion around Richard. You may be wondering, Joe, what we're going to do with it. Well, Richard is a client. So in my interaction with Richard, since I am dominant on experimenting, I would want my messages to Richard to come across as strongly as possible to him in terms that he can understand and terms that he can appreciate. So I would have to begin to think about how I can change the way that I communicate in order to get him on board, in order to get his buy-in on certain things. So it's probably time, Joe, that we moved on to some other exercises on this. And for those of you listening in, I hope you're able to think of somebody that thinks differently to you and behaves differently to you and speaks differently to you, so that you can think for this next part, the third principle, align, how we can begin to actually adjust in order to maximize output. So there's a couple of different areas to this. One is thinking whole-brained. One is about using all 4 quadrants in order to solve problems better. Now, what that means is that if we think about those strengths that we have, we are a mix of all 4 quadrants. However, as we've mentioned multiple times, we may have dominance in 1, 2, 3, or 4, which means that there may be a weaker or lower scored quadrant which we need to leverage in order to bring it out when solving problems. So in leveraging the quadrants, for me, I'll just put it on me, Joe. So for me particularly, I would need to make sure that there is no danger of me not understanding the landscape that the problem sits in, not making sure that that I don't, I have to make sure that I understand the return on investment. I have to make sure that I understand the numbers and facts that we're facing, instead of just diving in and trying to fix the problem without having the background needed. I need to make sure that I have some sort of clear plan to work through the problem, to make sure that I have steps that I can follow in order to have a serious output, instead of just jumping in and trying to solve the problem. So Joe, we do have a tool for this. And again, such a shame you can't see me, because if maybe I can just flick through it. I actually have a pad full of, which I keep with me on my desk, full of this document. And this is a walk around document. And I use this whenever I'm trying to think about solving a problem, to make sure that whilst my natural preference is there, I'm not blindsided by things I could be thinking about when working on any particular challenge. Let me just see how we can do this. Joe, perhaps if we talk through a problem. We could probably get some people from the call to help us with it as well. And in the meantime, I'm going to take one of my walk around pieces of paper and start to fill it out when we think about solving a challenge ourselves. It would be great. Maybe actually, should we unmute everybody, Joe? But no, including yourself there, Joe. Maybe we should just do it through chat. What do you think?
Well, if anybody wants to sort of speak into the call, just let me know by typing into chat, and we'll be really happy to unmute you. Otherwise, just type into the chat. It's entirely up to you. I know that some people prefer to just type, so whatever you want. We'd love to have you talking, but equally you can just type if you'd rather.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to solve a problem. That problem is how can we motivate the team to come back to the office? So if I were to leverage this tool to do that, I would make sure that I would fill out how I'm going to solve that problem from all 4 quadrants. So that does mean then, let me just get back to this. That does then mean that I'd start to write on the paper I have physically in front of me some things around questioning. So do feel free to leap into the chat, and Joe, do feel free to interact as well. If I were thinking about motivating the team to come back to the office, I think from a questioning perspective, I would need to think about, thinking about numbers or analyzing or problem solving or fixing things or theorizing and so on. I'd need to make sure that I have a very clear analysis of how being back in the office will work. Now that could be, for example, the number of people I bring back, depending on how big our team is, right? But do we have them all back? Is that actually possible? Or do we have half of them back? In which case, do we have them on shifts? Or do we have them in cohorts? And so on. So everyone, do feel free to chip in. What else might we want to do? Starting with the big question, why do you want them to come back? Yeah, now why is cerebral. That sits across questioning and experimenting, but we could do why from a questioning perspective. So why do we want them to come back? Why come back? Yeah,
why
so
sort of points to the big picture, doesn't it? As I suppose. So in some ways, would that sit perhaps more in experimenting, Zach, in terms of the nature of that question?
In an holistic view, yes, why sits in experimenting, but there is a numerical thing to them coming back. So that why are they coming back could be linked to keep business running. Logically.
Yeah, true.
So,
I think another point that's come through is around how does what we're doing relate to government legislation? And there's a piece around analysing the legislation and then analysing the patterns in work and making sure that there's alignment there.
Yeah. Analysing legislation. Yeah. What is the logical process for bringing people back, etc. In classifying, Joe, we would need to, let me just get this next thing up. We'd need to start to think about a number of other things. Someone's raised something about mental health. We'll come back onto that in a minute because that's very much in the interacting quadrant. So we need to make sure those people in classifying, if they have a preference in classifying, they're going to be thinking about safety. They're going to be thinking about whether they can come back in the right way and what is the process to come back. So I need to make sure that I communicate a clear process.
I can imagine a sort of like a timetable or a calendar would be useful to people in the classifying segment.
Yeah, and also making sure that they feel that we've done everything we can to keep people safe, physically safe.
Mm-hmm. And would transparency come into that? So being transparent about the plans that you're making and any changes to the plans, people would rather know about the change rather than it being sort of glossed over or covered up, etc.
Yeah, and there's also an element of that in interacting as well. Okay, very good.
There's a point that's come through on chat about making sure people feel they're adequately in control of the process rather than being controlled. Yeah, that's an interesting point, Zach. Where would that sit on the quadrants? That idea of people not wanting to feel that they're being controlled versus people wanting to be in control.
Yeah, Joe, it sits squarely in classifying. So part of the communication that we'd want to look at as we bring people, the team back, is helping them to be involved in or feeling that they're involved in the process, even though some of it may be constrained by legislation and so on. So if we have, for example, a working party of people that we've communicated to and communicated to the wider team that help us work out the plan of coming back, perhaps using this document. as a starting point, then that would be good as well. In interacting, we've had someone mention about mental health. It does sit partly in, mostly in interacting actually, because of course it's all about the team, it's all about communication. So I'd want to recognize people, a bit of recognition around what team members have done, for example, if they've been furloughed, how they've kept in touch with each other and how they've kept motivated, and share those good news stories with the rest of the team as well. So that we're coming back to, so we can acknowledge from an interacting perspective that we're coming back to work, but we're not just thinking it's business as usual. We need to actually tell the story of what's happened between each other and listen to each other. Just as an example, in experimenting, when we're thinking about solving this problem, we would.
Sorry, Zach, just on the interacting piece,
Yeah.
is there also something in there around thinking about, you know, the kind of like the impact of your decisions on people? So, and maybe communicating how you're thinking about the impact on people. So, because interacting people, in my experience, are not just thinking about themselves; they're thinking about other people as well. So, is that something that would come into interacting?
Mostly, yes. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, in experimenting, you want to engage those people who perhaps have less of a risk profile, but of course we still need to have safety. But we need to make them feel engaged by keeping people motivated and making sure that it's not just we're back in and it's very sad and we've got our heads down at the desk. We're keeping people engaged in the office as well. So essentially, by using all 4 areas of the innovators profile, we can make sure that we don't approach a task just using our own personal preferences. For example, if it was just me, without a knowledge of this, trying to bring people back into an office, I would probably have less of a mind for the needs of people in classifying with safety, for example. I would probably not be focusing as much as I could be on making people clear on what we've done with questioning what we've done in order to make the return to work effective, and what we plan to do going forwards in terms of return on investment of coming back to the office.
Just to summarize that, that tool is really useful for when you're thinking about a job that needs to be done, or a piece of communication you need to create, or a project that you need to work on. That tool is there to think about the task and the actions that you're going to take from the perspective of the people who are going to be impacted by it, and from their quadrants, or the potential, thinking about it from all 4 quadrants, so that you're factoring in everybody's preferences when you're thinking about how you're going to take action. That's what that tool is for, right?
There's exactly right. There's 2 sides. One is firstly to help you think about a problem from all quadrants. Therefore, your thinking is stronger. But secondly, by doing that, you can start to make sure that your message is heard and your message is important to various different people with different strengths. And this can be seen in this. So I use, as you can hear from my speech, I tend to get away with myself sometimes. So I'm holding it up to the camera, which isn't on. This pad of walk around paper. I use that even for emails. So when I'm writing an email, I appreciate that if I have a broad audience with different strengths in different things, I need to talk to all of them. Or even if I'm sending out or planning a call, I'll usually make some notes in all 4 quadrants just to make sure I can touch on something which is important to them. Same thing, I'd write out the information, and then I would just make sure I reference the relevant parts linked to that email. So if we're looking at, for example, on an email, let's say it was a sales email to get people motivated once they'd returned to the office. I would talk about, firstly, the facts. What are the numbers linked to our performance in half 1? Then also, I need to be clear about what is the budget for H2, for half 2. How can we make sure that we actually go forwards and fix our numbers effectively? And if there's another project, what is the plan to implement our new CRM system, for example, a clearly detailed plan to engage people and alleviate people who want to know those things from the classifying or questioning quadrants. With interacting, I'd make sure that I was clear on the importance of pulling together as a team and making sure that we're all in it together and we're going to make those sales work. and for example, coming up with ideas on how we can interact with our customers more effectively. Sorry, I was ahead of myself there again because we haven't done experimenting. And with experimenting in this email, I'd write down some ideas I had on generating new leads, on new ideas for coming up with new leads for H2, or potentially I then ask the team to come back to me with new ideas for new leads, and loads more besides. But as long as I touch something in every quadrant, then that email is going to be strong. Some years ago, I used to use color coding and highlight sentences in the, this is when we'd embedded into the company with the profile. And I highlighted sentences linked to particular quadrants. That might be a step too far for a lot of people, but it really helped me to understand what are the quadrants linked to the message itself. I want to move on, Joe, because I know we don't have a huge amount of time left.
Yeah.
To adapting. This for me is probably the most important piece in the innovator's profile, and making sure that our communication is as strong as possible with each other. I have absolute personal experience with family members where I've managed to resolve conflict, and where I've managed to have the most happy outcome of any challenge I've faced with family members that you could possibly imagine. So I want to really make sure that with Align, when we're aligning ourselves to each other as a team or with other suppliers or customers and so on, we need to be aware that we have to adapt ourselves. We've looked at strengths already, but there is something around frustrations as well. Joe, you can see just from an innovator's profile point of view, that was an experimenting slide there, which I'm sure you didn't like as much as you could have done linked to your own profile. Now, in this, you'll see in the questioning quadrant things which will frustrate those people who have a dominance in questioning. It doesn't mean all of them will frustrate that person. With things in classifying which will frustrate them, things in interacting which will frustrate them, and things in experimenting which are likely to frustrate them. So things which frustrate me are not likely to be, they are too much repetition, too much detail. I only like headlines. When I use metaphor and people look at me blankly, and mostly no sense of fun or playfulness, that immediately turns me off. However, it's our ability to adapt ourselves. So if is Richard still on the call? I don't know.
No, actually, Zach, I've been in touch with another colleague on the call who's going to step into this piece for us. Okay, so it's going to be Alan.
Okay.
So are you happy for me to step in and sort of guide Alan through this?
Yes.
Because he's very kindly stepped in at short notice here. So Alan, I'm going to allow you to talk. And what I'd like you to do is, looking at the screen, but also thinking about your own experience, share with us what are some of the frustrations that you experience and that you feel. And I know you, Alan, and I know that you're a very a generous and open person. So you probably overcome these frustrations quite quickly. But if you were to think about the frustrations that you need to overcome, if you can share those with us, and then everyone else on the call, if you type into the chat which quadrant of the profile you think Alan's dominant in. So Alan, I'm going to allow you to talk. You'll need to unmute yourself to do that. Hello, Alan. I can see you.
Hi. Hi. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yeah, we can hear you. So yeah, share some of your frustrations that you may feel even for a moment before you overcome them.
Okay. So one of the key frustrations is speed and the pace of things. You're kind of dealing with something, and sometimes I find the interaction drags a bit. You know, people are like heading off in a different direction, and I'm going in a different direction, and we want to just get the pace up. So that's a frustration. The other thing sometimes frustrates me is people come up with ideas, but there's no justification. It's just like some mad random thing that from where I'm sitting doesn't really relate to anything. You know, it's like I'm happy to engage in experimenting and I like being creative, but I find sometimes people misjudge the mode we're in, and that can be a frustration. So the speed we move and what we're actually doing at the time are two key areas of frustration.
Thank you, Alan. So I can see some people have come up with some ideas about what Alan's dominant strength might be. We've had a couple of people say questioning. Any other thoughts coming up about where Alan's dominance lies? And Alan, I personally think that we are probably cut from a similar cloth. My gut feeling is that you're certainly on the left-hand side in terms of your dominance, and possibly the top left.
Yeah, questioning, I would say.
Yeah.
I think what I do naturally is analyze things.
Mm-hmm. I analyze things as well. And actually, you know, I find that the analysis is a really powerful springboard for creativity. So you can then jump into experimenting, or you can jump into interacting, which is my other dominant strength, because you've got the basis of the facts, so you can then share with confidence. I mean, and having worked with you, I sense that kind of dynamic going on for you as well, that, you know, you like to have your facts so that you can then influence people.
And I think that's right. And the thing I'd add to that is, in my experience, I totally agree with what you said, is the creativity from the way I work comes from those facts. Once you've got that base, that's where the creativity then builds from, rather than this random kind of walk process that just, you know, randomly comes up with crazy stuff. Yeah.
But of course, people who are predominantly experimenting would absolutely, you know, they would absolutely find that walking and that kind of, you know, taking stimulus from everywhere, the way to go, and then they would build their facts afterwards. So there's no one of the key things that Zach always reminds me of when I'm at loggerheads with him, because we're basically polar opposites, is that there are no bad quadrants. There are only different quadrants. Isn't that right, Zach?
Right.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for taking the time and for sharing. That was great.
That was lovely. Thanks, Alan. And Alan, I apologize for my behavior over the time that I've interacted with you in the past. Okay, so that was lovely. That was good. Lovely, actually. Very good. So I just want to reinforce the benefit of making sure we can adapt ourselves into other quadrants. And firstly, it's to increase our own effectiveness, as we mentioned, so that we can talk around all 4 quadrants. But also it's to flex those ideas in which we are less strong, so that we can practice becoming stronger and having a better communication, and minimize any communication filters we might have with our team or with our suppliers or customers or family, so that we can break down any communication barriers and our messages heard in a much more powerful way. And one of the interesting things is, in our communication with others, it becomes very easy for us to communicate with people in our own dominant quadrant, because we talk in circles. But that does perhaps mean we might run away with ourselves, especially on the right-hand side of the brain there, in talking about things without rationalizing it or putting a process to it or getting clear feedback or pushing boundaries in the way that we might need to. Similarly easy is communication between those left and right modes, because questioning and classifying have similarities. Experimenting and interacting have similarities. One is more intellectual and one is more instinctual, with the top and the bottom modes. So communicating between those two is reasonably cohesive. It does become more challenging on the horizontals here. So if communicating between questioning and experimenting and between classifying and interacting is a little bit more challenging, so it's a time when we really need to think about how we communicate. If I'm communicating with Alan, for example, how can I adapt myself to give Alan the facts that he needs around a particular topic? And similarly, the most difficult is those diagonals. Now, you will have people who have double dominance in questioning and interacting, or experimenting and classifying, which is perfectly normal and fine. But generally speaking, they are diametrically opposed. So for someone who's strong in experimenting to have a clear, processed conversation with someone in classifying and vice versa can be a real challenge, and it's something we really need to focus on. A lack of understanding of the expectations of output of communication is one of the key reasons why communication, teamwork, and experimentation falls down so often. So I strongly recommend that you think about speaking from your least preferred quadrants. Just practice it. Practice flexing that rubber band so that we can do it. And Joe, you can hear in my voice, I'm definitely experimenting. There's like a tumble of words that come out. Have we got enough time for me to just try adapting myself to one of my least preferred quadrants?
You know, my classifying energy is saying, no, 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 we're running over. But we did start slightly late. So I think, I mean, if anybody has to go, then, you know, you can catch this in the recording that we'll be sending to you afterwards. But I think it's worth going at the right pace for the rest of this. We'll be done within, what, 10 minutes, Zach, as a maximum?
Oh, God, max, probably 7.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay, Joe, give me a topic. Do you want me to do the same topic so you can see the difference?
I think that's a great idea. So it was choosing a life partner.
All right, questioning or classifying, both low scored for me.
Do whichever one you think will be more difficult.
Classifying. Right, I've already adjusted my body language. I'm sitting up slightly straighter, less gesticulate. I'm not waving all over the place as you haven't seen me do because I don't have a video.
This is...
Sorry, I'm preparing myself. Joe, I am keen to find a new life partner, and I've thought about it, and I'm going to come up with a plan to find that life partner. I have analysed. I know that's questioning. I have looked into the detail of 15 online dating websites. And I have, based on an analysis of, I'm slipping into questioning.
Zach. I think what you're demonstrating is that it's something worth practicing because it's extremely difficult to do. I think you made the point quite well.
I'm overthinking it. Joe, I've got a clear plan for coming up with a life partner. Firstly, I'm going to create a profile for myself. Secondly, I'm going to find the very best photographs of myself, the ones that make me look better than I am. Thirdly, I'm going to upload that profile to 15 online dating websites. Fourthly, I'm going to make sure I analyze and work through systematically every single person on that website until I find the correct life partner.
I'm going to hold you to account on all of those things. And if you do not have a life partner by next Thursday, you'll have done something wrong.
Practice. It's our ability to adapt and engage others, which ensures maximum communication effectiveness in innovation, leadership, and culture. Now, I just want to reinforce why the profile is important. This is one of our last slides. And that is that whilst you may have taken psychometrics or personality tests, which are similar, what we love, as we mentioned earlier about the profile, is that it is all about flex. It's all about making sure that we can practice what we preach, poorly demonstrated by me earlier, so that firstly, you know yourself in Diverge and how you approach challenges yourself. Then, by making sure that we can double check any problem or innovation or idea or communication, whether it's written or verbal, so that we are tapping into every single area that we might need to. Also, that we can see a problem from all 4 quadrants: the what, which is questioning; the how, which is classifying; the who, which is interacting; and the why, which is experimenting. And by understanding ourselves in Diverge, we are then able to understand others in Converge by recognizing their key strengths and their dominant quadrants. And by doing that, by knowing ourselves in order to adapt to others in Align, we can maximize the communication between a team. And by using tools like the signals document and the walk around, we can ensure that we ask the right questions to people in a way that they understand, so that every output is strong. And I would recommend that you feel free to take the profile, reflect on your approach, think about how that plays out in other people. Note down anything from this webinar which you feel may have resonated or is some sort of light bulb moment, and then just practice using that profile. Joe.
Thank you so much, Zach, and thanks to everyone for engaging on the chat. Thanks to Alan and to Richard for joining in and speaking. And thank you, of course, Zach, for your brilliant facilitation of this webinar. Thank you, everyone. On the screen, you will see an invitation to join an online program that we've recently launched, which delves into this in even more detail. You'll access all of the tools that Zach has talked about today and many, many more. Use the QR code just with the camera on your phone, and be sure to use the code that is on the screen now, Rebuild June 50, to get 50% off the cost price for the course. So do that, and look forward to seeing you in the course. It's completely on demand, it's self-paced. You can do it when you need to, you get lifetime access. And I will also send you the link to it via email after this webinar, along with this recording and a few bits and pieces that I hope you'll find helpful in relation to the profile. So thank you all so much for joining. Look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Stay safe, be strong, and adapt, converge, and no, you don't want to diverge, do you, Zach? You want to be aware of diverging so that you converge, yes, and then adapt.
And align.
And align. Yeah, that's right. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Stay strong. Be safe.
Bye.